They did it to us again. I cannot believe it. They went and changed things around. But then again, that really shouldn't surprise anybody, given that's what Blizzard likes to do between patches. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my 7.1 Retribution Paladin Guide. I am Spyweaver with True Spy Gaming. Things have changed between 7.0 and 7.1. Herein, I will detail it all for you. Once again, do note that this guide is subject to change because, as I just said, Blizzard continually changes things left and right. As things change, if it warrants another video, I will definitely put one out. If it just warrants an annotation, I'll put one of those out as well. Further stating, this is also current for 7.1, and this specific annotation or additional guide itself assumes you have watched the comprehensive 7.0 guide. Without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive right on into it. This is the 7.1 Retribution Paladin Guide. Buckle in. Alright, let's dive on into part 1 of this guide to find out what exactly has changed with the Retribution Paladin between 7.0 and 7.1. Fortunately, compared to some specs, there really wasn't too much that basically has moved between these two patches for the Retribution Paladin. For the most part, we did avoid the nerf baton, but at the same time, we avoided the large buff baton. We did get a little bit of a slight buff, but it's really not too much to write home about. The first but most notable one is that Blade of Wrath has been redesigned. It is now a passive. Your auto attacks have a chance to reset the cooldown on Blade of Justice. If you remember right, Blade of Wrath in 7.0 dealt X amount of holy damage on cast and then X amount of holy damage over time on the enemy. What Blizzard kind of did here is very intuitive. They noticed that at high heroic level and low mythic level gears, Blade of Wrath is actually falling behind Virtue's Blade, which is left remotely unchanged. That Blade of Justice critical strikes now deal 3 times normal damage. They noticed that already was overtaking the old Blade of Wrath. So they figured they needed to do something to prevent a stale talent from arising. But then again, maybe I'm giving them too much credit, because if that's their reason for redoing it, why haven't they touched Execution Sentence yet, and why is Consecration still just a sad panda? I don't know, I guess they felt the need to work with the new talent that they have given Paladins in Legion. That is the first major change right there. Blade of Wrath auto attacks have a chance to reset the cooldown on Blade of Justice. The next big one actually comes in your level 100 tier down here. Holy Wrath now deals 200% of your missing health and damage to up to 4 nearby enemies, up to 120% of your maximum health. There never used to be a cap on the amount of damage that this would deal altogether. That up to 220% of your maximum health never used to exist in there. Straight up, this could do up to 200% of your missing health to X amount of nearby enemies. Perhaps they felt the need to nerf it down a little bit because our health levels are getting so high already. As you can see down and below the screen, I have 2.1 mil. But that being said, really nobody top tier is favoring Holy Wrath over any one of the other talents in this tier. Personally, I didn't think this was a needed change. Somebody upward somewhere in Blizzard decided it did need a change. I guess so, there you have it. I also believe in 7.0 that it actually only dealt 50% of missing health against enemy players. Now that has changed to 35%. If you read the specific patch notes, those are the only two that you will see. However, let's get a little tricky here. They kind of did a little bit of a ninja nerf slash buff-ish. If you notice, we only have two passives, our Heart of the Crusader and a Retribution Aura. Sword of Light is now missing. Sword of Light used to be the old talent that we had that increased damage done by two-handed melee weapons by 5%. If you recall, if you watched the 7.0 vid where I went over the baseline abilities and we got to it, I stated why don't they just get rid of that and roll it into our abilities just all together, because it's kind of stale because everybody's using two-handed weapon at this point anyways, so what is the point of this? Granted, it could have been used as an easy tuning mechanism. They could have just tuned that itself instead of the abilities. But that is actually what they have turned around and done. They got rid of the Sword of Light talent itself, rolled that 5% into all of the abilities. Now, why do I make a big deal about that being all of the abilities? Because it only used to affect things, that our two-handed weapon would do. Now it turns around, and any ability that you cast got that 5% buff. There's certain abilities where if I go ahead and take off my Ashbringer, that you can still cast. The big one here being Judgment. Judgment's still around, I can still cast it without that weapon. That's the main buff of that went into. There's a few other abilities that got that buff. But all in all, they just straight up rolled that 5% right down and across the line to all of our abilities. And really, honestly, that is the biggest changes that have happened to the Retribution Paladin between 7.0 to 7.1. Like I said, there really hasn't been much. They really didn't do that much to change the class. They tweaked what could have potentially became a static or a stale ability in Blade of Wrath because it was already falling behind. Gave us something new to play around with. Everything else for the main point left the same. We did have quite a bit of a scare though during the pre-patch, or I should say during the PTR when they were testing it. They were going to change Crusade, get rid of the haste buff portion of Crusade and have it increase damage done, reduce cooldown, I should say, on Judgment. Fortunately, they actually listened to us in the forums, scrapped that, and left Crusade the same. So Crusade is the same. The only real changes talent-wise you'll see is Blade of Wrath is now a passive. Auto attacks have a chance to reset the cooldown of Blade of Justice. And they just capped the amount of damage that Holy Wrath can do up to 120% of your maximum health. But there you have it. You have the new and updated stuff between 7.0 and 7.1 specifically. Next, we will go ahead and look into different gearing options, what the stat weights are kind of looking like, and what you're going to want to be looking for going forward in 7.1. Let us go ahead and dive into our new gearing and or stat weights. And you can't see me right now, but I'm doing air quotes as I say stat weights because Retribution Paladins do not specifically have a set of cookie cutter stat weights that applies to every Retribution Paladin for every piece of gear across the board like most other classes. Why do I say this? I say this because I feel like the Retribution Paladin DPS is more or less of an algorithm than it is a set of numbers, like 1 through 5 with an X somewhere in there. I feel like it's a straight up algorithm. Why do I say this? Because your stat weights will be different than mine, and your stat weights will be different with a piece of, with gear A on your head versus gear B on your head. Stat weights can literally change in between switching pieces of gear. According to a first set of stat weights you might have, a piece of gear in your bag might be better, so you go ahead and toss it on because you're using pawn, because your string that you have and say it's better. Then you notice that your DPS is kind of lacking ever since you have put it on. You go ahead and sim yourself then again and find out that now you are simming at a lower DPS and your pawn string has changed yet again. That is a great example of the fact that our weights and our best outputs can change in between different pieces of gear. That being said, I always suggest sim yourself with any new piece of gear. If you have a question as whether or not something is better than what you have on currently, go ahead, grab Simulation Craft, run a sim with that other piece of gear, and find out if it actually does give you more DPS over your current set. That being said, for those of you that still want something to look at, I did go ahead and put together what my stat weights are currently looking like. To keep in mind, I'm now sitting in 860 gear with the Legendary Cape. That will change it or affect it as well. Don't know how I finally got lucky enough to get the Legendary Cape. It took me all the way through 7.0 into 7.1. It was about, I don't know, I think I had 30 hours of gameplay time in 7.0. It might not seem like a lot, but it was a pain in the ass that it took me that long to get it. But this is what my stat weights are showing out to be. Strength, Verse, Crit, Haste, and Mastery. If you remember right, a little bit lower gear levels when I did my 7.0 video at 840s pre-raid gear. Mastery is actually around the 6 area. It is now around 8.5. Blizzard's changes have upped Mastery's value a little bit, actually kind of substantially by 2 whole points, but not enough to make it really worth something that you want to prioritize. Really, that's about the only stat that I would suggest to stay away from. If you want to use straight values, however, there's your Verse, Crit, Haste, followed by Mastery. Of course, Strength is still your predominant stat, so more often than not, you're going to want to take something that has more Strength than what you are currently wearing. Now this also brings us into another interesting point to talk about, the fact that Retribution Paladin has breakpoints. We had discussed this in the 7.0 vid. It was generally theorized around the time in pre-patch as well as in beta and when Legion dropped that that area would be 30% that we'd want to hit. We have since found out that there is not really a breakpoint per se at 30%, so you don't really need to push for it, but that's not saying if you want to get that much haste that you shouldn't. Here's where I might get shot by some other Paladin players, but I believe haste is more so a to-feel stat. What feels better for you in the rotation while you're DPSing? What is allowing you to keep your numbers as high as you can and not have that much downtime during your rotation? Now granted, this is a little bit different now with the rework on the Blade of Wrath talent, because we do have that random proc chance that can cover any downtime in our rotation, or priority I should say. But there's still an effect of, the cooldown on Judgment versus the debuffs uptime. The new general, the first breakpoint you want to hit with haste is 17.5 to 18%. I usually just say 18% for a flat number to round to. That would be the first breakpoint to hit. Above that, it's generally agreed upon and or theorized by some of us that 22% is where you would want to start cutting off and looking for other stats. 22% gives you a decent amount of haste to lower the cooldowns on all of our abilities. Allows us to not have more than one GCD that we will not have the Judgment debuff on our target, all the while being able to ensure that we do not flood ourselves with holy power. That in and of itself does become an issue, or becomes a thought that you should have in the back of your mind with the new Blade of Wrath talent. So for example, let's go ahead and paste back to this here. We'll bring up my gear, 864. I just did some reworking the other day by running some more sims. But what we are running into is I now am at 28 crit with 25% haste in this gear. 25% haste is putting me at a 9.6 second Judgment cooldown. With Judgment being up for 8 seconds is about 1.5 GCDs, or basically one cast after Judgment falls off before I can cast Judgment on my target again. Personally, I'm sitting at 25 just because I like how it feels with more haste. And of course, with the gear I have gotten, this is what sims with the most DPS. Once again, like I said, there isn't a set scale factor or a pawn string for rep. It's just straight up sim the two pieces of gear and see what's better for you. Then after that, you have your haste. Your first breakpoint you want to hit will be that 18 to 22 area. After that, it's strictly to feel. That being said, gearing for the Retribution Paladin in Legion now follows something along the lines of haste to the 18 to 22% area, greater than verse, greater than crit, greater than all other haste, greater than mastery. Of course, strength you're going to want to put in there at the top of that, above your 22% haste. I don't know where I'd personally put it in with the 18% haste. Once again, that's another thing where I will put another disclaimer here. Do not take more haste to sacrifice a huge chunk of DPS. If you sim yourself with a piece set of gear that has higher haste and you come out, say, 6k DPS lower with that piece than another piece that sits you at, say, 22% haste, stay with the piece that leaves you at 22% haste. Only grab that extra haste if it's not going to entirely hinder you to the point of basically breaking your gear in your class and just making it impossible for you to pull competitive numbers. That's why I say Retribution Paladin is more of an algorithm. It's finding the right balance between your verse, crit, and haste numbers. Hit your haste breakpoint, and then just find what gives you the most DPS and feels the best for you between the other secondary stats. Now you're probably going to come back at me and say, okay, well, that being said, what is our BIS list? There still is no BIS list as far as it goes for gear itself for the Retribution Paladin. Straight up for the fact that you might have something that shouts out Titan Forge at 895. It might come out with a socket, which sockets are roughly equal to about 15 to 20 item levels, I believe is what it was has been calculated out to be. Sockets will affect that. Titan Forge and Warforging will affect it. Once again, if something drops and if you're curious as to whether or not it is better than what you have on, go to Wowhead, find the item ID numbers, up the item to the current level that it is that had dropped in game. Grab the ID number, throw it into SimCraft for yourself, hit simulate, see how much that compares to your current gear simulation. If you want to do this, I would suggest having a current gear simulation, the gear that you walk into the raid with, up on a simulation crafted and simulated done before you start the raid. That way all I have to do is just change one thing, hit simulate, kind of run around a little bit, pretend you're doing trash for about a minute, alt-tab back, check the DPS, whether or not was it increase or decrease, and then you can let your master looter know whether or not you wish to roll on that piece of gear. I know that might not be what most of you wanted to hear, but unfortunately that is the sad truth. We do not have that BIS list, except of course for one thing, faulty countermeasure. Faulty countermeasure, regardless of the item level, is always going to be freaking amazing. But aside from that, trinkets, other pieces of gear, sim yourself. It is going to vary between you and me. They won't be the same. Between you and your friend, it won't be the same. Between you and somebody else in the Retribution Paladin Discord, it won't be the same. If they tell you piece of gear A is better than piece of gear B, nod an okay and say, okay, thanks for the insight. But then just go ahead and sim it yourself and find out what is best for you. That is what you need to do to maximize yourself and your DPS as a Retribution Paladin. Same goes for gemming and enchants. You got something with a socket on it, go ahead and mess around in SimCraft and change the gem that you put in that socket. Find out what will benefit you the most, and then go ahead and put it to a test to feel, a feel craft test. But take your feel test at a grain of salt compared to the simulations, because the SimCraft numbers it gives you will be way more accurate than you going and whacking a dummy for a while. But that is the gearing and stat weight updates and changes here in 7.1. Next, we will get into our new talent selections, priority lists, as well as a new opener that surfaced actually with the last update when Blizzard buffed all of our abilities by roughly 15%. but you will be able to see it in action here in this 7.1 video. Stay tuned. Alrighty, now with 7.1, you no doubt have questions on which talents we should be taking as a Retribution Paladin that will increase our DPS the most. Unfortunately, there really isn't too much to say in the way of these are the set talents that you should be taking 100% of the time, no matter what. However, with that being said, you honestly need to sim yourself to find what pulls ahead for you. Here is what I am currently running. With the new Blade of Wrath rework, I'm running that with the Fires of Justice. Everything else is fairly standard for what you have seen between 7.0 to 7.1. I mean, your tier 90 is up to you. Do you want extra horse charge? Do you want to be able to make sure that you're the last person living when they have a wipe, or that you can basically have a cheat death mechanic? Really in the 75 tier, there's really no more point to taking just Takar's Vengeance because the amount of holy damage that deals, for the fact that it costs 5 holy power, just is not worth it. So that just comes down to you want another survivability cooldown versus a utility cooldown. 45 tiers is basically up to you. I would still stay with Blinding Light because that is technically a DPS cooldown because it does damage when it hits. And then the first tier is still the same as well with Final Verdict. That Execution Sentence just falls so far behind, and Consecration is just sad. Same with the bottom tier. Crusade still pulls way ahead of both Divine Purpose as well as Holy Wrath. That being said, our only really questions come down to between Fires of Justice and Blade of Wrath. As you can see, that is what I'm currently running. Let me go ahead and pop this up on the screen here for you. That are my comparisons with the different combinations of those two tiers. Patchwork fights, a little under 6 minutes, 25,000 times per. My current Fires of Justice Blade of Wrath sits at the top at 407. And I will note as well that this is with haste food because I did not update that within the simulation itself and a few other things that I usually mess around with to optimize it. Fires of Justice with Virtue's Blade, the 3x crit, drops off to 401, roughly 6k behind Blade of Wrath. So let me go ahead and change Zeal out and use Zeal with Blade of Wrath. That is roughly 11k below Fires of Justice and Blade of Wrath. So then for why nots, let's go Zeal and Virtue's Blade. That basically just kind of falls off the face of the earth there, as you can see. Way down at 374.5. That being said, with my current weights, my current gear, for me, the best setup is the Fires of Justice with Blade of Wrath. However, that's not saying it will be the absolute 100% best for you. Once again, it can change from person to person. However, it is kind of been fairly seen across the board that Blade of Wrath will pull ahead of Virtue's Blade in both simulations. I have known some people have said that they actually have their Zeal / Blade of Wrath pulling ahead of Fires of Justice on single target patchwork, which is what this was done with. So that being said, straight up, either go with the grain of salt and take what I have shown you here as Fires of Justice and Blade of Wrath, which was what works for me, or sim yourself with all 4 options and go with what it tells you. Really, it can't hurt to have all 4 of these copies in your sim that you run, especially when you change out a piece of gear. So you can see, okay, maybe right now with Fires of Justice and Blade of Wrath and my gear, it's giving me the 407. I change out to this other helmet, but then that pulls ahead Zeal and Blade of Wrath over Fires of Justice with Blade of Wrath or something like that, and it still gets you a net DPS increase. Once again, back to the whole, it's an algorithm idea. There's a lot of moving parts that you do need to satisfy here. But that is what that in and of itself looks like. The next bit I'm sure you're wanting to look into Let's go here. We'll kind of go ahead and start talking about rotation and priority lists. Specifically speaking, our priority list has not changed too much. Blade of Wrath talent kind of throws a little bit of a monkey wrench of sorts in there, because it kind of limits what we want to do with our holy power and when we want to use the ability itself. That's where this kind of comes up. Of course, party list always top is going to be Wake of Ashes with 0 holy power optimally. You don't want to delay Wake of Ashes too long if you have 1 holy power, just to make sure you use up a Fires of Justice proc if it so happens to be. Personally, I've fired off Wake of Ashes with 1 holy power at times because I want to get as many in as I can per fight. So I just kind of take that hit. If at all possible, though, if you get lucky and have a Blade of Wrath proc with that 1 extra holy power, hit your Blade of Wrath proc, hit the Templar's Verdict, then go ahead and throw off your Wake of Ashes. 2, of course, then is your Judgment. If there is no debuff on the target, of course, there's really going to be no situation where you will have Judgment off cooldown when the debuff is not on the when the debuff is on the target. Excuse me. But you'll always want to make sure your Judgment is up on the target before using a Holy Power Spender, which then, of course, drops us down into our Holy Power Spender. Templar's Verdict, 3 to 5 Holy Power. Judge debuff, of course, on the target. Personally, I say there's no reason to stack to 5 Holy Power unless your Judgment debuff has fallen off and you're waiting for Judgment to come off cooldown. At 3 Holy Power, don't be afraid to fire off Templar's Verdict. The whole nuance of the Retribution Paladin priority is getting out as many Templar's Verdicts per fight as you can, because it literally does roughly 35 to 45% of our damage throughout the course of the fight. It is clearly our highest damaging ability. It is clearly our priority to get that out as many times as we want per fight. Therefore, once you hit 3 and the Judgment debuff is on the target, fire it off. If the Judgment debuff is not on the target and you're sitting at 4 or 3 holy power, go ahead and do a few more spenders. If you're sitting at 5 holy power and the Judgment debuff falls off, I would say that would be the one rare one-off where you would want to fire off that Templar's Verdict without the Judgment debuff on the target. It's still a decent chunk of damage, but the loss of DPS that you will sustain by firing Templar's Verdict off without the Judgment debuff on the target is significantly less than the loss of DPS that you will accrue or that will happen if you just sit there and simply white hit waiting for Judgment to come off cooldown. Because if you're at 5 holy power, ideally you do not want to spend your holy power spenders, because that just floods you on resources. Those extra resources that you don't get to use are a waste, and all in all, just a bad panda idea. I would argue, however, on the flip side, that you could fire off Blade of Justice during this downtime in hopes that it would proc and come up again before you get to your next building phase. However, just try to avoid sitting around 5 holy power, which would then result in the situation where you're at 5 holy power, your Judgment has fallen off, and now what do I do? So just avoid that altogether by firing off your Templar's Verdict as soon as you're over 3 holy power, 3 or greater, as soon as you possibly can. After that, then, of course, Blade of Justice with, it should say 0 to 3 holy power, but we get the idea. That way it doesn't overcap you on holy power. Of course, at 3 holy power, you use it, it'll put you at 5, so you won't want to use it any later than that over any other spenders or generators. Of course, once you hit that 3 threshold, you're going to be firing off Templar's Verdict. Crusader Strike, then, of course, when Crusader Strike has 2 charges, then a Crusader Strike with 1 charge, which I would still prioritize over Blade of Justice when you have 4 holy power, because, of course, Crusader Strike generates 1 holy power. If you got 4 holy power, you're not wasting that resource. If you still fire off another Crusader Strike to get to 5, Blade of Justice, then, of course, with the 4 to 5 holy power, just because of the fact that it can proc and instantly come up again, and in a sense, then we don't waste the resource. we still do, but then in a sense we don't. So then that's what the short and simple of the priority list looks like. Of course, it can fluctuate a little bit if you do have the cape. I can go ahead and later on make a DPSing with the legendary cape guide if you guys so request it. Because I know as more and more of us get that cape, we'll be looking at a different sort of priority, because then it becomes a question of, okay, well, when do I want to prioritize keeping up my cape buff versus, firing off a Templar's Verdict to keep up the cape buff versus waiting till I have my Judgment debuff on the target to fire off Templar's Verdict. Because essentially to keep the cape buff up at all times, you need to have another Templar's Verdict off within 3 global cooldowns. If you can't get that, your cape buff will fall off, and then it becomes a question of, do I keep up cape buff versus Judgment, and it all depends on other extensional circumstances. Then we also do have this other little nuance of our Crusade opener. Here's what it looks like in 7.1. If you are a Horde, which is Master Race, and Blood Elf, which is even more Master Race, you'll be firing off Arcane Torrent pre-pot, pre-pull, pre-anything. It is a free Holy Power. Just use it as you see fit. It doesn't need to hit anything for you to generate the Holy Power. It just generates it on use. Make sure you don't use it too soon, though, to result in you losing that Holy Power. Then, of course, Blade of Justice as you're running in, because you want to get that talent ability on cooldown as soon as possible, because that will start its ability to proc and come off cooldown. At that point, then you'll be at 3 Holy Power, so you want to hit Judgment on the target to get that buff up, hit your Crusade, because then you can instantly start building stacks with the Templar's Verdict of 3, bring it down to 0 Holy Power, Wake of Ashes up to 5, Templar's Verdict up to 6 stacks, and now you are at 2 Holy Power. Blade of Justice, if it's off cooldown, is good to fire off here if you got a proc anywhere within the upper echelons of this opener. If not, fire off Crusader Strike for 3 Holy Power again. That'll get you a Templar's Verdict, which will get you to 9 stacks, which either leaves you with 1 or 0 Holy Power at this point. And then you just roll into your normal priority list. Fairly straightforward. In 7.0, it could have been theorized and could have been argued before even the 15% buff that a Justicar's Vengeance Holy Power dump, in essence building to 5 Holy Power, hitting Crusade, dumping that 5 Holy Power, Wake of Ashes, dumping that 5 Holy Power, both times with Justicar's Vengeance, and then beginning the normal rotation, would have been the best, because within 3 GCDs you would have 10 stacks. However, now, essentially, it's just not worth the DPS loss. It's a net loss to waste that Holy Power on a Justicar's Vengeance versus using it on a Templar's Verdict. Quick little showing of napkin math for you. My Templar's Verdict currently deals 214k damage. I go ahead and mouse over the Justicar's Vengeance talent, and that does 222k damage. Essentially, you are only gaining that 10k, 11k damage, but you're sacrificing 2 Holy Power for it. So those extra 2 Holy Power that you sacrifice to use Justicar's Vengeance only give you 5k damage per Holy Power spent. Totally not worth it at this point. It'll be a net DPS loss if you even think about using Justicar's Vengeance in this instance. That being said, we'll go ahead and take a look at what everybody, I'm sure, wants to see. How this looks in practice. I got sound on my end just because for me it helps me, and I just like being able to hear myself whack things. Also do note that this is the Retribution Paladin area. I do like training it on the Raiders training dummy because it gives me better numbers, but that resulted in cleaving over here to the Dungeoneers training dummy. I could run over here to the single one, but really it doesn't make any difference, honestly. I mean, either way, I can run to a single or I can cleave. Let's just go ahead and run to a single for the purpose of this. Do also note that it's in the front of the boss or the dummy, and there also is the chance to be blocked and or parried, etc., etc. I am not a bad Retribution Paladin this time in this guide. I remember to go ahead and put my Blessing of Might on myself. Really, it doesn't matter whether or not you have it on or don't have it on when you're doing your damage. I would say if you want to do a dungeon whacking for the sole purpose of testing what piece of gear is better or what trinket works better, and you're going to sit here for 5 to 10 minutes X amount of times and do it over and over and compare numbers, don't put Blessing of Might on yourself, because you can't really control Blessing of Might as another variable that could adjust those numbers. Simply leave it off. If you're practicing, sure, go ahead, put your Blessing of Might on yourself, because hey, it's fun. We all like seeing big numbers on our damage meters, because why not? But if you're doing it for the straight purpose of testing out pieces of gear, leave Blessing of Might off yourself, because you want to have as little amount of variables as possible. The only variable in that case you really want is your gear change. So our opener, generally we can stand relatively within Blade of Wrath distance to the boss without pulling it. At least I am on Thendra. On stuff like Elrath and that, so on and so forth, I basically just run into cast it as soon as possible. And also do note that this might not be the most spotless view, but it'll just give you a quick glimpse and idea of what it kind of looks like as I talk through it and do it as we go. So let's see if I can actually get this here to work without being in a group. So you saw I got a proc there. So we're going to fire off that proc. Bam. Now we're just back into Crusades. I forgot that this one actually hits you, which is the main reason why I don't usually use it. But there's that before I go ahead and die. Forgot that that one hits you. It's kind of a nice meme, but it's still really funny at the same time. That's kind of the short of what that one looks like. We'll go ahead and pause it here. I will cut the video to when my Crusade comes off cooldown. We'll give it another look on the Raiders training dummy over here so I'm not getting whacked, which will give you a better view of how things look in the grand scheme of things. Alrighty. We are within 25 seconds here with Crusade coming back off cooldown. The DBM pull timer put up served a few purposes. Basically, it kind of lets you see how you do things pre-opener. Of course, it popped off my Arcane Torrent at 2 seconds because our pre-pot should happen at 1. That'll help maximize our numbers with the pre-pot as best as we're possibly able. Of course, we're not going to be able to maximize it completely due to not having max Crusade stacks up for most or the maximum amount of duration of the pot itself. But honestly, any little bit is better than not having it. It's a pre-pot, you're going to want to use it at 1, and then that's when you start firing off your damage. Arcane Torrent you're going to want to use before that pre-pot, so generally I would just use it at either 3 or 2. If you feel your latency may be an issue, go ahead and fire it off at 3. And then about 1.5, go ahead and use your potion. Basically, that one's up to you, but get that potion as close to 1 as you possibly can. Let's just do this again, since my guild likes to do an 11-second pull timer. We're all sitting here doing nice memes at 4, we shut up. Alright, fire that off. This time you see, for some reason I had 5 holy power, but we'll just ignore that. This time you saw I didn't get that proc until now. Cape buff fell off. That's a whole other biddy. And here we're just starting to go ham now. Get the judgment back up. Get that for the cape buff. There's a proc. 3 holy power. 1, 2, judgment. Bam. 1, 2, judgment, proc. And then, of course, Wake of Ashes is your priority, and then now we're back to here. That way, firing off things right at 3. There I got a nice proc, so I was able to keep the cape buff up. But here I got a little bit of downtime. Of course, that proc happened after I cast my Blinding Light, because Blinding Light is better than having no damage output at the time. Now we have a little bit of downtime because no procs came up. Use our procs. The Judgment. We're going to save the Wake of Ashes because I can get up to 3. I have 1. I'm not going to delay it any farther because I want to get the most I can out of it. Now I'm not using that proc because I was at 4 there. We build back to 3. Of course, the damn thing parried me. Get the Judgment back up. Arcane Torrent came off, so we'll just fire up that. Gain 3 Holy Power and 1 big wall up there. Fire that off before firing that off. I probably could have fired off at the same time, but like I said, it's all about getting the most Templar's Verdicts out as you can. Sitting here whacking the boss. Basically just pumping out as much as you can. At this point I'm just kind of ignoring my Wake of Ashes because I've basically just kind of shown you what it generally looks like. We're going to back off here. We're going to let that Holy Power itself expire. Then we'll run back in and do one more for you. Alright, we'll put another pull timer for 11 because by then my Arcane Torrent will be off cooldown. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, pot, run in. My Holy Power didn't expire, so just kind of ignore that. Got a proc, so I was going to use that to get rid of the Holy Power because I had a Fires of Justice say in that instance. And then go ahead and basically just take care of your rotation. That's another nice thing about these Blade of Justice procs. I get parried there and just kind of fired it off with Judgment, but you get the idea. If you have a Fires of Justice proc with your first Templar's Verdict, and then Blade of Justice procs, go ahead and fire off that Blade of Justice before your Wake of Ashes. Now, why do I say this? Because that Blade of Justice will give you 6 Holy Power total. I mean, the Blade of Justice, excuse me, will give you 3 Holy Power total. Your Wake of Ashes will give you 6 Holy Power total. You're wasting less resources by using that Blade of Wrath proc before firing off your first Wake of Ashes. But essentially, that's what our new Crusade opener looks like. It's straight up grab 3 Holy Power as fast as you can, Judge, Crusade, dump, Wake, dump, 3 dump, 3 dump, 3 dump, so on and so forth, with Judgment staying on the target. That's most of this in the nutshell. Next section, I'm actually going to give a quick rundown of my weak auras, do a few closing talks here. We're going to look at some relics as well. And that'll be the end of this guide. Stay tuned, the last bit will be coming at you very shortly. Last but not least, for this 7.1 Retribution Paladin Survival Guide, we're going to just type a few odds and ends here for you. First bit I just want to kind of throw at you right here as a quick reference guide for relics for the Retribution Paladin. Basically, what is the best for us, what you're going to want to kind of shoot for, what each is weighted as. It basically goes without saying that Avenging Wrath duration or Wings duration relics are what we want to shoot for. Essentially, the more uptime we have or the longer our wings last, the longer we have that Crusade buff rolling and the stronger we'll be. And that being said as well, each one of those relics is approximately a 1.84 DPS percentage gain. That in and of itself works out to be equivalent of 24 item levels over the item level of the relic itself. Do note that by no means this is an end-all be-all, but it is a general guide to kind of look for. And this is also procured or given to us by a Noctil, one of the more prominent names when it comes to the Retribution Paladin, theory crafting, etc., so on and so forth. The next is Deflection, kind of right in there with Might of the Templar. Deflection basically deals with our Shield of Vengeance cooldown. Of course, this is also given that you use Shield of Vengeance on cooldown to get the most that you possibly can out of it. If you plan on using Shield of Vengeance on cooldown and popping it every time, A deflection relic gets an eye level equivalent of 12 to it. So if it's an 830, you can technically compare it as an 843. 842, excuse me, I can't maths. Might of the Templar's verdict damage increase. It gives it basically an 11 item level increase. And then you just kind of go down from there. High Lord's Judgment and Deliver of the Justice, as well as Sharpened Edge are both all the same. And then anything else really is just flat 0, doesn't give us any increase, over what it just basically shows us for the eye level and strength increase that it would produce for our Ashbringer. So that being said, essentially you can look at it as the fact that an 830 Wrath of the Ashbringer relic would be better than an 850 Righteous Blade relic, because 830 plus the 24 item level equivalent of the Wrath of the Ashbringer, 854 Righteous Blade, 850, just straight up an 850. So essentially you can use this as a quick reference guide for you, for basically grabbing relics to be the best, what relic would be the best for you. Once again, thanks to Noctil for providing this for us. Definitely a good resource to use going forward. Last little bit I just kind of want to touch on is some different weak aura strings. You've no doubt probably over the last few videos seen mine kind of change from time to time, but I kind of have a few good ones here at this point. While you currently see me up and running, ignore my bloodlust because I just run that beside myself so I don't have to look up for other buffs. What you currently see on your screen right now is what I basically consider my comprehensive, all-in-one weak aura string here. Basically gives you anything and everything you'd really need to know or want for the Retribution Paladin. Some icons are larger than others to grab your attention so you can fire it off sooner. Of course, Wake of Ashes up here, a little bit of a larger icon, so hey, it's off cooldown, it grabs your attention, fire it. The little Art of War-esque flash up here only comes up when you have Blade of Wrath as your talent selected. It pops up and gives you a little sonar ping when Blade of Justice comes off cooldown. Anytime Blade of Justice is sitting off cooldown, this up here, I have flashing, but that just so during raid encounters, ping off cooldown, there we go. Right here is my Holy Power warning. I have this basically pop up whenever you hit 5 with a big old 5 on it, and well, it's an audible aw crap, to let you know you're at 5 Holy Power. If you can, cease Holy Power generation right then and there, and go ahead and fire off Templar's Verdict. Next, right down here is your cape buff tracker. Of course, this only will pop up if you have the cape. Arcane Torrent, right down here in that little area is where Divine Hammers would show up if you have that talent selected, or if you have Virtue's Blade, that's where Blade of Justice would show up, because there's really no priority to it as much, or it really isn't as important, I should say, as a Blade of Wrath proc, getting that fired off as soon as possible, but that's where that would show. Judgment, twofold. If Judgment is off cooldown, it'll be the solid icon. If you are attacking a target that your Judgment debuff is on, you will see the numbers counting down the duration of the Judgment. Avenging Wrath is also twofold here. Solid icon when it's off cooldown. While you are buffed by it, you will see a countdown for how much longer remains of Avenging Wrath itself. Then just straight up a little bit of an FCM tracker right here. I just use that just to make sure in my macro that I have to fire off both of these, that it actually does fire off and I don't have to continually spam it. Shield of Vengeance tracker, solid icon, of course, once again when it's off cooldown. Once you have it utilized on yourself, it counts down until the time that your Shield of Vengeance expires. That way you can make sure you can glance over, oh, I got 3 seconds, I need to quick take some damage to blast my shield. And then we're back to Wake of Ashes. That is my comprehensive, as I call it, week or a set. I did put together another week or a set. Kind of, I call it my light set. Right here, basically kind of shrinks everything down. Doesn't take up as much space, but still gives you the main meat and potatoes. You no longer have the flash above your head for your Blade of Justice procs, the Blade of Wrath talent. Instead, it just simply moves back down to this icon. Still gives you the sonar ping when it comes up, and it will also flash. You'll have an outline a flash outline around it, I should say. Excuse me. When it is off cooldown, when it is usable. Once again, you still have the 5 Holy Power ping up here with the aw crap, simply for the fact that it needs to get your attention. You have 5 Holy Power, stop Holy Power generation. Cape buff tracker, of course, minimized that down a little bit. Got rid of the Arcane Torrent, because honestly, you should just straight up know when your Arcane Torrent is off cooldown on the 2-minute mark. Pop it off, no big deal if you're a Blood Elf. Judgment tracker does the same thing. Same with the rest of these, do the same thing. They're just shrunk down and reorganized just a little bit to look a little bit cleaner. It takes up a little bit less space when you're fully zoomed out here in raid situations. Those are the 2 different weak aura strings I have together. They really should have anything and everything that you would need in them for the Retribution Paladin. I will put a link below to my Google Docs that have both of these in it. As well, it has what you can see down here in the bottom, my Greater Blessing of Might tracker. What that in essence does is go ahead and shows you who has a Greater Blessing of Might and what the duration left on that Greater Blessing of Might target is. Of course, this only pops up when that target is within range, radar range I should say. And also within a raid environment, if it is requested, I will go ahead and add a little bit of a string to this one as well. That basically either outlines your screen or puts a big old text in your face saying apply X amount more GBOMs, you stupid idiot. Or something. I don't know. If it's requested, I'll go ahead and add it. But essentially, it's just a nice, easy, lightweight tracker down there to let you know you got 3 Greater Blessings out. This is their duration left. This is who it's on. It'll also give you their name on the bar itself. So it's just an easy way to quick glance. You can glance down wherever you put it. Say I only have 1. And you put out 2 more, etc., etc., so on and so forth. That is also visible. That string is also on my Google Docs below. So that's the big little bit here. I just want to cover up a few tight ends. But once again, I mean, folks, there you have it. That is the rundown of the Retribution Paladin in 7.1. Not too many changes between 7.0 and 7.1. We did get a few damage buffs. We did change the priority up a little bit. Our opener did change from a different theorized version from the Quick Holy Power dump. It could have been argued back in early 7.0 that Quick Holy Power dump did have its benefits, but now it's completely out the window. And those are the changes as well. Straight up, if you have any questions, you can either comment below, shoot myself an email, true_spy@outlook.com, or you can always find me in the Retribution Paladin Discord. I also will start getting up one of my own Discords as well, True Spy Gaming, just to try to kind of keep a little bit of the clutter out for people to just want to come and get a quick question answered and leave. I can put the link to that below as well if people wish. Basically, that's all you need to know to survive the Retribution Paladin 7.1. Would like to thank you for watching. As always, I do stream regularly throughout the week. You can find me at twitch.tv/spyweaver. Links to that below. Subscribe, give me some thumbs up if you like this. I'm also on Twitter at TrueSpyGaming, TerraUSPOY Gaming, no spaces between any of that. You can find the most up-to-date things about my streaming schedule, what videos are going to be coming out, so on and so forth on that. We'll be doing some fun things with that as well as it keeps going, getting off the ground here. But anyways, go ahead and give me a follow, like on all those. Look me up when I'm raiding. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 8 Central to 11 Central, and I always do stay on a little bit extra doing random shenanigans. We'll also randomly stream throughout the week. The best way you can find that when we're going live is by Twitter or subscribing to me on Twitch. Anyways, there you have it, folks. Would like to thank you for watching. This has been Spyweaver with True Spy Gaming, signing off. Until next time, folks.